Like the fight over who's going to get to run the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Our chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Cirilli, is on Capitol Hill with one of the decision makers, Representative Jeb Hensarling. He's House Financial Services Committee Chairman. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, David. All right, Mr. Chairman, the Senate is likely going to vote on this tax reform package this week. Is it going to go to conference?
Oh, it absolutely is going to go to conference. I mean, that's the way the system is set up. There are great similarities between the two bills, but there are distinct differences, too. They'll have to be worked out in conference. There absolutely will be a conference.
Some of those differences include the state and local tax deduction issue, as well as this trigger issue as a potential form of revenue. What do you make of these potential differences?
Well, it is important to a number of our members, not so much me personally, but to other members, what we call the SALT, so the sales and local tax deduction. So I think in some form or fashion, a portion of that is going to have to be preserved. Those of us in the House aren't all that thrilled with the tax trigger. I personally find it to be a uniquely bad idea, and I think it is bad public policy. We need to be able to tell corporate America, we need to be able to tell our small businesses, this is your tax rate. This is something that you can count on. This is something that you can go ahead and do capital expenditures and count on. And so what we know is it's not just economic theory, but frankly it's economic history. The difference between having an economy grow at 3 and 3.5% versus 1.5 to 2%, which has been the average under the 8 years of Obamonomics, the bottom line is we'll be able to fill any deficit hole with additional revenues. And we basically saw the same during the Reagan tax cut, frankly the Kennedy tax cut. You can even go all the way back to the Coolidge tax cut. We will be able to raise more revenues. And if not, as a Republican, the answer would be less spending, not more taxes.
So this is interesting because I think there's a lot of conservatives who are trying to decipher right now how much they should be worried about deficits. And you are very member on economic policy, and you're not saying that you're that concerned about the deficits in this tax reform package as it stands.
If I thought that this would exacerbate the deficit, I would not support it. Everything I know about this tax package, based upon my reading of other pro-growth tax reform packages, is that, again, this will help bring about an extended era of 3 to 3.5% economic growth. That will be more than enough to make up the static $1.5 trillion over 10 years that this is being estimated, or what we call scored now in Washington, D.C. So the most important thing we can do with respect to the national debt, and it is the greatest crisis that receives almost no attention in Washington, D.C., but what we need to do is obviously reform current entitlement programs for future generations. That's a heavy political lift, but so far we haven't had any help from the Democrats, any desire to do it. But the second most important thing we can do is grow this economy and bring in more revenues. This tax reform package will get it. I believe we will get more tax revenues than the static costs.
Still confident tax reform gets done by the end of the calendar year?
Well, I'm not quite ready to bet my soul or firstborn on it, but I would bet a pretty good, tidy sum of money, yes.
All right, it's been a busy week for economic policy. Earlier this week, I caught up with Senator Elizabeth Warren to get her take on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the politics going on there. Let's play what she told me, and then I want to get your response.
When the American public gets wind of what Wells Fargo did and the investigation that the CFPB conducted into this, all of a sudden they say, oh, wait a minute, we're on the other side of that argument. You should have found it faster. You should have been more aggressive. My answer is, give me a break.
So she's saying, weighing in there on the Wells Fargo issue with regards to the CFPB. What's your response?
Well, one, I'm glad she acknowledges that CFPB was essentially asleep at the wheel. And it is also curious to me that a former law professor doesn't appear to know the law, because the law is that the president gets to appoint the acting director. That is the position of the Justice Department. That's even the position of the legal counsel at the CFPB. The one circuit that has opined on it, the Ninth Circuit, which, by the way, traditionally is a very liberal circuit, they have also said the president can appoint an acting director. So, number one, Senator Warren is on the wrong side of the law. And then also what we need, Kevin, is obviously a body that will enforce our consumer protection law, but not make it up. And unfortunately, what we have here is probably the single most powerful
The road regulator, as you call it.
Well, indeed. And so what we have is we have a body that is essentially Congress, cop on the beat, prosecutor, judge, and jury all rolled into one. It tramples on our separation of powers. It tramples on our checks and balances. It tramples on due process. We have one unaccountable, unelected individual who essentially gets to decide on our mortgages, our credit cards, and our checking accounts. No one person in a democracy should have that much power. And so there is a fight on who's going to lead the CFPB, but the more important fight is how do we best protect our consumers? And it's through an organization that enforces the law, doesn't make up the law, and also protects competitive, transparent, innovative markets. That's how we protect our consumers.
We've got about a minute left, and I want to play this forward into the next couple of months, because I think that deregulatory financial reform is something that's we're going to be talking a lot about. The House has already passed the Choice Act, and you've passed several laws out of your own committee.
Feels like we passed it years ago.
It feels like that, but now Chairman Crapo on the Banking Committee releasing some framework. Are you confident that in the first quarter of next year, or when is community banking reg relief? When is that when would you predict that gets done?
Well, listen, to Chairman Crapo, he's made a lot of progress in putting together a package. I think that they're going to mark that up next week. I would hope that they would take it to the full Senate shortly thereafter, and I look forward to going to conference with them. I have no doubt that the Senate will get their way on a number of matters, but I would expect the House to get their way on a few matters. The bottom line is we're still losing a community financial institution a day in America. That's unacceptable, and we have too many regulations that are clogging up the arteries of capital flow. And so, again, the fact that entrepreneurship and small business lending at banks are basically at a generational low, that's got to change to have a 3 and a 3.5% growth economy.
Chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Jeb Hensarling, thank you for coming on Bloomberg. Jonathan, I'll toss it back to you in New York.